Good morning, Lesley. Thank you so much for joining us. You mentioned, I can't see it on your screen, but you mentioned that you're sitting at a window with a view out looking onto the snow, which is most appropriate for the subject matter of this interview today.
Yeah, good morning, Ross and Gareth. I am up in the Highlands of Scotland on Aviemore, and I woke up to a little bit of a snowstorm, which is great for if you're like me and you like snow sports. So happy days. We've had a good snow season so far up here.
And a good Winter Olympics so far. Have you enjoyed it? I mean, are you watching it with a sense of longing that you're not there, or are you over that?
Um, Now and again, I'm like excited, and I'd think, oh, I wish I was standing at the bottom. But I'm watching it very much as a fan. This time round, all for the last for Beijing and for Pyeongchang and for Sochi, I was part of the support network, if you like, team manager or team leader for GB Park and Pipe team. And then pre Sochi, I was actually competing. So 2010, 2006, 2002, and even 1998, I was in the mix for the qualification. So I've had many Olympic cycles. I try not to run my life in 4 year cycles, but it creeps in. It definitely
I
creeps
mean,
in.
if you,
So nice to be a fan this time round.
yeah, yeah, it's saying that your first Olympic appearance was 2002, but you just mentioned you were in the run qualifying for 98. So that makes, by my calculations, almost 30 years of Winter Olympic involvement. So this is the first time as a fan that you've been able to sit back and appreciate what you're watching from a different perspective.
Yeah. I'm absolutely, although I'm still slightly involved, I'm still involved with the Fist Park and Pipe subcommittee at international governance level and with GB Snow Sport at governance level as well. So I'm watching as a fan, but I'm definitely still involved.
Let's
Yeah.
talk about a little bit to start off with about how you got involved in your journey because you mentioned to me you began as an alpine skier. Your Olympic appearances were all in snowboarding. So obviously there was a point at which you transitioned from the skis to the board. But I'm actually more interested in how you get into alpine skiing in the first place. And so now we're going back even before your Winter Olympic involvements. How did you come to be a Winter Olympic athlete in the first instance?
So um, I'm not sure my story is that dissimilar to many other winter sports athletes. I grew up in a winter sports community. It's in the north of Scotland, so that's novel. It's I grew up in a place called Aviemore. It's next to Cairngorm ski area. Both my parents were involved in the snow sport industry. My dad was a first of all an instructor and trainer, and my mum instructed a little bit, but she was a local PE teacher, and so then was a part of the local club. The club was really thriving. It was lots of fun. Had lots of friends who were into ski racing. Just fell in love with it, and then from there followed the usual kind of local competitions, Scottish competitions. Was fairly good at it. Got onto the Scottish national team, the British national team. Started to race internationally, and then when I left school, I did a couple of what we'd call seasons. So for me, that looked like going actually to America, and I joined a couple of clubs over there, Jackson Hole Ski Club first of all, and then Breckenridge Ski Club, and then got that was when I got on the British national team. The kind of community and passion for skiing and then snowboarding later was how I got into competitive snow sports. So the passion came first, the
Mm.
passion and the community, and then the competition.
It always surprises me that the UK can actually compete at any level against, the Nordic countries because the opportunities are so small for UK skiers because obviously you're up in north of Scotland, so you've actually because the one thing you need is snow. So how does the UK actually even manage to get a foothold in this sport?
I think the passion for snow sports in the UK is massive, and whether that's dry slope snow sports, so somebody like Alpine slalom racer Dave Riding grew up skiing on a dry slope, um, and we've had lots of Mia Brooks, for example, top level snowboarder, current snowboarder from the UK. She grew up riding in the indoor domes and the dry slopes a little bit. Kirsty Muir grew up skiing on Aberdeen Snow Sports Centre, which is a dry slope, and the mountains in Scotland as well, before she went abroad and took her career to an international level. So there's snow sports going on all the time in the UK. And although it comes and goes a little bit within the club scenes, they are really thriving snow sports communities, and they extend out into other action sports like mountain biking. On the one hand, mountain biking, paddle sports, climbing, mountaineering, and on the other hand, skateboarding, surfing, more free sports. So there are two kind of cultural streams. But within those communities, the people are really, really passionate about their sport, and those sports are done with an environment. They're really relational to the environment. The equipment's obviously an important part of those sports. So there are similarities that people build connections through. So something like wave pools, like the Wave in Bristol or Lost Shore in Edinburgh, are an example of what the dry slopes and the indoor domes are in the UK. So there are definitely strong communities. That's how people get into it. And then there's a lot of expertise. There's a lot of expertise and a lot of passion, a lot of, because you're not doing it in the mountains, you develop really good workarounds. You get really good at improvisation and problem solving. So how do you train when you've got no mountains? Dave riding, and my cousin Alan Baxter is actually one of the coaches of the slalom team, and they spend a lot of time training in the indoor domes, being very, very technical. Their strong point, Billy Major, just did really, really well. 16th and 17th, I think they were yesterday. I have to check that. I've not got the Alpine slalom results there, but Laurie Taylor, Billy Major, Dave Ryden are top slalom skiers. They've been in the top 20, all three of them together in World Cups this year, with a Scottish coach. And that's really, it's not actually, it's exceptional, but it's not that unusual. We have in alpine skiing, the Scottish influence is really strong. Their head coach of the US men's team is Scottish. The technical coach from the German alpine ski team, Scottish. Mark Tilston, Mike Pilarski, shout out. The influence is deep, and those are just a couple of the many names I could mention that are coaching at the very top level in snow sports internationally. So we're not outliers. We're very influential, and that comes from, I think, passion, community, but also exceptional innovation and ability to work around challenges.
And that situation, I assume, has evolved quite significantly. Like I was reading, in 2002, your first Olympic appearance in the snowboard was followed by what I read was you were the first person from Great Britain to win a half-pipe snowboard event on the World Cup circuit. So, like, we're not that far removed from pioneer type stuff. How has it evolved in the last 30 odd years? Because you spoke about expertise is so high. Has that always been there? Maybe a seed of it, but it would have grown exponentially. The reinvestment of that knowledge, like where are you now compared to where you were in 1998, 2002 when you first went to an Olympic Games?
Are you asking in terms of the broad snow sport picture, or snowboarding in particular?
No, the GB's Winter Olympic program. I think, Gareth, you won some sliding sports at these Winter Games. The skeleton program is world leading.
Yeah.
It feels to me, and I'm very much outsider here, that between Australia and yourselves, you've made this real commitment to win Winter Olympic medals, and there's been quite a deliberate strategy at identifying the sports where that can happen, capitalizing on the strengths you mentioned, but also finding new ways to perform and so on. It feels to me like a model for targeted investment.
Definitely from UK sports perspective, I would say that's the case. That's not really, my department, but my experience of that has definitely been the UK sport optimize their investment, and they work collaboratively with the different governing bodies of the individual sports to support the sports to do the best for their sport. And that will look really different in skeleton, in alpine skiing, and in snowboarding. Each sport is quite different, although GB Snow Sport is the governing body for all the snow sliding sports. So I think it's a patchwork picture,
Mm.
but there are definitely targeted approaches to how do we do this well, and perhaps the enough of a flexibility. I think there could always be more in terms of how you tailor it to each sport. The the support for coaching and for coach development that UK Sport are focusing on is definitely influential in that space, but they're not just investing in coaching. It's a what would you
Mm.
say, 360-degree picture.
Mm.
I was reading that the way UK Sport were doing the funding is very, very targeting because they actually, for this Olympic cycle, they cut the Alpine funding in order to redirect them towards freestyle skiing and snowboarding. So it was definitely an advantage there for your side of the sport now. You've switched from the Alpine and they've cut the funding. But they obviously target it in that direction. In that sense, where are the paths for youth to come into the sport? How because snowboarding, freestyle skiing, it's like a cultural thing, and we'll get to talking about that a little bit later. But where are the paths for youth to be brought in? Because obviously you don't do skiing in schools, things like that, whereas you can do athletics. So do they
Up
target
here,
the kids early on with this funding, or is this
yeah,
purely for the professional top end?
yeah. Up here they do snow sports at school. So I have an 11-year-old daughter and she's going skiing or snowboarding, she can choose, with the schools. So it does happen. Snow Sport Scotland definitely had a schools program for a number of years. So we in the UK, it looked different in every country, but in the UK there's home nations governing bodies that feed into GB Snow Sports. So the structure of the sports comes from Snow Sport Scotland, Snow Sport England, Snow Sport Wales, and there are initiatives locally to support the dry slopes, the domes, the Scottish ski areas. And they have programs running all year round, whether they're introductory programs or whether they are more entry level to performance pathway programs. So there are things, learning is happening, learning and fun happens all year round.
Yeah.
The Alpine club scene is very strong. The park and pipe, if you want to call it, scene. There's not so much. There are not so many clubs within park and pipe. It's more communities, and there's lots of peer-to-peer learning goes on, like in a skate park. So it's thriving. There are opportunities to get into it. It's expensive. Snow sports is an expensive sport,
Mm.
so that's one of the main barriers. There within the home nations, there are always initiatives to break down these, whichever barriers exist. There are initiatives to break those down as much as is possible, and that looks different. There are always projects going on.
Are things changing because kids just want to do the cool sports? They want to do the snowboarding, when they see Kirsty Muir, which because it's a little bit more exciting, isn't it, than like the Alpine side of things, which is a little bit more traditional. So have you seen that shift? Have you seen the kids coming in and wanting to do the tricks rather than just the
um, yeah, I think it's a very park and pipe, very visual, and I think both Park and Pipe and Alpine are strong. They have good participation at junior levels. I'm obviously these days far more into the Park and Pipe side, and I think the storytelling, the visual nature of it really works with you know, there are pros and cons to social media for sure for kids, but one of the pros is the idea of fanzine promotion of learning and cool stuff, cool tricks. It works really well. Everyone's got a camera. Everyone can film one another. There is a standards of excellence appreciation. So people like good tricks done well in Park and Pipe, and so the kids learn that. They learn to do things well. They learn that you can't post a trick that's not landed and that looks bad. So they get better at doing it, and they do it through working with their friends in a fun way and showing that process to their community. I think that's quite a powerful and healthy thing. It connects people. So in that sense, yes, kids are coming in, it works well, it feeds off of one another, it builds community, community builds support, the support eventually ends up leading to people like Kirsty Muir and Mia Brooks standing at the top of the Olympics with a chance to win.
It ended up for you exactly the same way, obviously, because you went to 3 Olympics, didn't you? I think you were ranked third in the world at, when was it?
2003-ish, maybe
2004? In
four.
between
Number one,
2003,
actually.
2004.
Don't do Lesley a
I do.
disservice. I
Wait,
think you
or
were.
was I not? I think I was.
But
I've got a number. I've got a yellow bib. I do somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
was I once?
so
I
just for
forgot about
listeners,
that.
the yellow bib is to snow sports what the yellow jersey is to cycling, right? So you're leading the World Cup at that point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right,
yeah,
okay.
exactly, exactly.
But
Yeah,
but I was gonna say I don't know how to touch on this one, but you never medaled in the Olympics. So
no, no,
that's got to be one of the biggest regrets, unfortunately, for you. Then you had the
no,
chance.
no regrets, no regrets. The Olympics is back then. I think it's not so different for the park and pipe athletes these days. But zoom back to 2002, especially. Snowboarding was an outlier sport, not within our own community. It was a big sport, and we had X Games, and if the experience of big events was very much within the context of youth culture or park and pipe culture. So at one point, the ISF, who run International Snowboarding Federation, who run the initial or original Snowboard World Series, partnered with MTV Snowball. And so we had these massive events where MTV would rock up and put a big marquee up at the bottom of the event venue, and it was a music festival on the side of the Snowboard World Cup. So we were used to having lots of people around and lots of pomp and lots of energy, but it's a very different kind of energy when you get into the structured environment of the Olympics with uniforms and rules and team structure, people telling you what to do. That was so alien to me in 2002 that I found the hardest thing to cope with was the structure, and the having people around who didn't know how to be in the park and pipe space. Now, we zoom back in 2002, we could choose our own music to ride to in the half pipe. It was a celebration. It's like party atmosphere in as much as you're putting on a show. Of course, we all took it seriously. The questions were always at the time, especially after 1998 and Ross Rebagliati-gate, the Canadian alpine snowboarder who was tested positive for THC at the Nagano Olympics. After that, every journalist that asked me a question would ask about it. And is that all you do? Party and, like lay about? That was definitely not the case. We were all athletes. We were all doing lots of other sports or training quite conventionally, one or the other. So we were doing our thing, but we were doing it in a very different sense culturally. So when I say any regrets of our Olympics, there's two things. There's that jeopardy that's built into park and pipe performance. I'll come back to that in a little minute. And then there's it is a performance. You want to put on the best that you can do and make it look as good as possible. So you are prepared to go to the fine line. Perhaps I would go a little bit too close to that fine line. I crashed in every single Olympics I went to for different reasons. 2002, I just think got too excited and couldn't really deal with the structure. So I had this real pull, this tension going on of what did I have to do to not get in trouble? And if I forgot to, do something I was meant to do that I didn't know anything about, versus wanting to put on a show. 2006, I'd just come back from a really harsh ankle injury. I smashed up my ankle in the April bit in 2005. I did loads and loads of rehab, and I was so ecstatic just to be able to come back and ride in 2006 in time for the Olympics. And it was all a little bit too much. So I was on the edge because of coming back from an injury. 2010, I was really just lucky to have qualified. I was coaching at that point, so I was a coach rider. And because of my experience, and I just got really into it. I won last blast, if you like. I was coaching the Roxy team at the time that I qualified, so I was on the edge of what my body could handle. By that time, I was like 34 years old. So yeah, I was broken and maybe not quite ready to handle that kind of training. It's a bit unfortunate, but I got to see the Olympics from a totally different perspective. Definitely no regrets in any Olympic performances. Um,
Can I just ask one thing? You go back there. You said there was a massive, like almost like culture shock between you and perhaps the organisers of the Olympics, or not the organisers of the Olympics, perhaps Team GB. Do you think that's changing? Do you think the things aren't
yeah,
quite so?
it's massively changed. 2002 is a very long time ago. Um, Snowboarding has been part of the Olympic program now since 1998, and each national governing body has grown and learnt alongside snowboarding, and the relationship's a lot more symbiotic. But this was the main driver behind my research. So the research I've been doing at Leeds-Beckett University has been really taking a deep dive along with the action sports community, high performance action sports community, into this idea of, is there still a culture clash, and what does it look like? What can we learn about how to support action sports athletes better, so that that tension doesn't creep in and kind of thwart the chance for the best performances? So I think things have changed a lot, but I do think that way of being, that tension is still there. It just comes out in slightly different ways.
Mm. I mean, that's obviously the one of the things we want to focus on a lot, is that your research, what you've called the risk aesthetic framework, the philosophy. Just before we get onto that, because otherwise I know we're not going to come back to it, and I said that I wanted to do it because people have asked. You spoke a little bit about the training, and you look at these athletes, and I could tell you how cyclists, I could make a good guess about cross-country skiers because I know cycling and running and so on. But talk to us a little bit about the training. You said a lot of it is conventional. I mean, what sort of training were you doing from 2000 or 98 even all the way through to 2006? What's it like for a snowboarder?
So there's lots of cross training. So I came in from an alpine ski racing background, and again, it's quite a long time ago, but zoom back to the mid 90s, and alpine ski racing was really cutting edge in terms of how they approached physical preparation. We were doing, at that point, alpine ski racing time, was doing a lot of Olympic lifts, a lot of plyometric work, a lot of really high end cross training approaches. The design of the training programs was as you would look at a good training program now for alpine skiing. It's come along some ways, and of course there's been lots of really great sports science added into those recipes, but it wasn't so dissimilar. When I jumped ship to snowboarding, I continued to do that kind of conventional approach. I still did a lot of Olympic lifting, I did a lot of strength work, I did a lot of core stability work. I had support from the Scottish Institute, worked with a really great physio from rugby called Stephen Much, actually. Did loads of really good stability work alongside the strength work, and lots of endurance work, because at that point we were hiking the pipe. So you're hiking for like 5 hours a day and riding and training the pipe. It's ridiculously fit at that point. On the off season, I do a lot of biking because I like biking. And then I've always, fortunately for me, done a lot of yoga. That came from more, my aunt was really into yoga as a teenager, and I did that more to, as a relaxation tool, but it stood me well throughout my whole career. So there's a real blend of lots of different things. I took up skateboarding when I started to snowboard. So skateboarding and surfing became not just I was passionate and still am, hobbies, but they became a cross training tool, if you like, although I didn't think about it in that way. I just thought about it as going skateboarding or going surfing. There's definitely a good crossover there. These days, I think there's still a lot of people from snowboarding and free ski, skateboard to a very high level, or surf. There's some athletes that can surf as well as they can snowboard. But alongside that, if they have any support from either sponsors who have training and rehab programs like Red Bull Performance Centre, or national teams, you've got access to all the top level sports science and physical prep knowledge. It'll look different for every athlete, of course it will, because it has to. But the kind of training people are doing will be a good endurance base. It'll be strength, plyometric, stability work, lots of proprioception and agility work along the side. So it's pretty sophisticated.
And then gymnastic
How
elements.
do you train?
The gymnastic elements, yeah, good question. They're also running along the side, and that again, it looks different for each person. In GB Park and Pipe, when I was a team manager, we brought in a top level gymnastic and trampoline coach to work with our athletes. That looked like, so places like the Loading Bay in Glasgow or Greystone Action Sports are skate parks that have a trampoline and foam pits integrated into their facility. Woodward are an American company who runs these similar types of training centres, incidentally run by a Scottish person, Gareth Trainer, in the States. So action sports athletes will go to free sports training centres and they'll do a blend of skateboarding and jumping into an airbag that can happen inside or outside. I'll come back to that. Or trampoline work that's coached. So that's integrated into their physical prep program. The airbags have been a real game changer. So zoom back to 2016, and GB Bark and Pipe actually had the first full-size on-snow airbag set up. And that looks like a massive, how do you describe it? Have you seen one? Then we don't have to describe it. It's like a 25-meter wide, 50-meter long bouncy castle landing that they put on the landing of the big air jump. So the athletes are landing into a reduced risk. It's not no risk, but it's a reduced risk environment. So these days, lots of athletes will prep the new tricks on the airbag landing, which obviously takes out a lot of the initial risk in learning a new trick and has been instrumental in the level of progression.
That was going to be my question, is how on earth do you train the technical aspects when you've got like you were saying, you were hiking halfway back up to the top of the half pipe to do it all over again. You make one mistake and then you're back to the start. So obviously you've got an injury risk doing that as well.
Yeah, they don't hike so much these days. There are like usually a chairlift or a pom or a magic carpet. That's a bit old school. They don't have to do that anymore. Well, fortunately for them.
Going back to you in 2002 or whatever, were you only able to train? Obviously, you didn't have the airbags or anything. Is that the only way you could do it? It was literally repetition. How would you learn a new trick then? Do you build like on blocks of, you start with one somersault and then you add a bit and you add a bit? And obviously, were you creating tricks at the time? Because it was fairly new at the time. So were you sort of like the person that...
So people are still creating tricks all the time. And so before I go back to 2002, at the moment, especially in snowboard on the jumps and snowboards, so you're going to see this in the snowboard slope style, the men's slope style. The athletes are doing what they call butters and bringbacks. So they are creating new tricks. They're changing the spin direction, either on the takeoff by buttering, changing the forces by, instead of riding a clean edge, riding a flat edge with a different pressure. So it's called buttering because it's like spreading with a butter knife on the takeoff of the jump, which adds a huge level of technical difficulty and jeopardy into the takeoff. Or they are rewinding the spin in midair, which is biomechanically and physically really, really, physics-wise, really difficult to do. And that's called a bring back. So instead of they've set the spin to spin, whatever, 1620, but they don't go all the way around, they bring it back to 14 at the last minute. So you need the ridiculously good timing and core strength to be able to work with that. So that's what new tricks look like these days. Back 25, 30 years, people invented tricks all the time. And that's part of the kind of currency of Park and Pipe, doing something new, doing something innovative or creative. So that was definitely a driver, and still is a driver, in the Park and Pipe event.
When they have tricks like this and they're inventing a new trick, obviously you're testing that out in training and so forth, and you can, with every intention of bringing it to competition. You at some point you have to disclose to them that you have it, right? Otherwise they don't know how to score it. How does
Uh,
Or can you
you
if I
don't.
stood at the top and I said I'm going to do something new that no one's ever seen, there'd be no context in which to evaluate it. So somehow you've got to tell people, like this buttering, for instance. Okay, maybe to the trained eye it's obvious, or when you're doing a 1620 and you stall at midway and you do a 1400, I'm sure some people can see it. I struggle to count even 3 revolutions, but how do they integrate a trick into the scoring vocabulary or framework?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a really important question, and I think this is the key difference between certainly snowboarding, or freestyle snowboarding, and gymnastics or any other conventionally judged sport. So there are no set tricks or maneuvers. It's an evolving, ever evolving picture within the judging criteria. So the way they've set their judging criteria, they're expecting novelty, and they can work with whatever comes in. They might not be expecting it, but they'll be able to recognize it. So the judges are really expert in what they're looking at. They're all really high level snowboarders or free skiers themselves, so they can understand the nuances of these innovative elements.
Hmm.
And there are trends, the butters and bringbacks have been kind of trending for a couple of seasons. And the great thing, the really novel and innovative approach, the judges have been consulting with the riders at World Cups over the last 2 seasons. So they've been having riders meetings between the judges and the competitors and the coaches about how to apply the criteria. So how to weight it if it's a conventional trick tree and it's just add another 180. Is that valued by the community? Is that actually more difficult than a bring back? What is more difficult? Ask the athletes. They're the ones who are doing it. Nobody else is going to be able to do a bring back on a 1620. You've got to have there's only 20 people in the world who could even think about doing it. So ask them, is that more difficult than going 180 in the same direction? How should we accommodate it in the judging criteria? How should we reward it? What about if you grab it in a slightly different way? So if your grab maneuver is an action reaction in the opposite way to the spin, that makes it more difficult. So that's why some grabs are worth more points than others. They're technically more difficult. And if you execute it well, generally execution and style are the same thing. It's just a very, very well executed, very difficult thing that you've done. And so the judges really understand the nuances of those elements and work with the community at the highest level to be able to apply the criteria so that novelty is allowed. We want that. We don't want to structure it out. Whereas if you had to name your tricks, then you're conforming towards perfection. And we're never doing that. It's always divergent. It's always like, what's possible? What comes next? What can we create today? Which is what's driving the sport.
So when that athlete is standing at the top doing big air we saw last night, or half pipe is coming up soon, only they know what they're about to do, and might they even halfway through change their mind, and the judges are reactive, because that then is fundamentally different. We learned from Jackie Wong a couple of weeks ago in the context of figure skating is every element is declared to the extent that I can now sit with my iPad and watch a routine and know exactly what they're going to try and do. I still don't always understand what I'm watching, but I can do it like that. This is completely different to that.
Completely different.
It's
Completely
interesting.
different. Now, the judges they're immersed in what's going on. So it's very rare that somebody will do something that you don't have a slight clue that they might do. Scotty James in the half pipe finals did a run he's never done before in a competition, but we had hints that he might put those tricks together in the way that he did. Um, there's always that rumor in the background. Oh, they've tried this in training. They've done it. Mia Brooks, she'd never landed that 16 on snow before. She never tried it on snow. She tried it on the airbag. So there was a hint that it was there. It was ready for the snow. So once you have a trick ready, when you're going to do it. There's not many moments where the energy is high enough, the conditions are perfect enough, you have the support of your peers, because you really need that to to be able to go, because is this the right thing to do at this time? And for me, we always say, you pull the flag on it, you go, you do it, it's go time. That kind of language is really visceral. And so although you don't know it's coming, you can expect that it might be coming most of the time. It's very rare that somebody just does something that nobody's ever seen or didn't know they had. Um, the young Korean rider um, who's actually sitting in third in slopestyle qualification for the women, Yu Yoon, I think say her name. Apologies if that's not right. We've not seen much of her on the international scene. She's really young and she's new to international competition, to World Cup, and she's been amazing to watch, but really surprising because she has big tricks that nobody's ever seen before. So in that context, you can be surprised. In the ski big air last night, people were trying things that they'd never landed before. And the commentators also, let's call them presenters. There's a bit of debate in the background about the presenting in the park and pipe disciplines and how different it is to normal presenting. But Tim and Ed, for example, on the BBC, they're experts. They know the sport inside out and also have that kind of spidey senses of, okay, this might be an extra 180 or a bring back that's never been tried before. They can feel the moment mounting. Again, that's part of the job. Being a spectator, you're viscerally responding to, oh, this is the moment. We're in it all together. Let's do it. And so everyone's cheering each other on because of that as well.
Do the judges have to evaluate it in real time, or can they review video footage in slow motion from 8 different angles to clarify what they just saw?
Another very good question. They have review capabilities
because they produce the
and
score
where
quickly.
That starts to...
So I don't think they use it much because of the scores. I'm always impressed and amazed at how quickly a score comes out.
The judges are really, really on it. They're a really strong team. They're used to working together. They have a really good system. They have really good access to playbacks. The drone footage these days is so exceptionally good that they can get all the angles that they need. How was the takeoff? How was the landing? How was the grab? So they definitely review all of those elements.
Yeah, I was going to say that the competition last night, I was reading this morning that Muir said he landed a stunning left double 1620 with 4.5 rotations, which put her into the bronze medal. I understand the bits of that. But then Tabanelli did exactly the same trick, but scored slightly better. So it must be incredibly difficult for the judges at that point to make a differentiation when they do the same trick. Now, is there tactics come into this? Do you choose tricks to sort of push yourself up the leaderboard because you know what you've got to do? So are you don't know what your set 4 jumps are going to be beforehand? You sort of making it up on the fly almost.
You have a really good idea of what you're going to do, and there are different formats that are used at top level competitions. So, for example, in the X Games in the big air, it's what's called a jam format. So there's a set amount of time, and there are ski-doos that take you up to the top of the jump, and the athletes can have as many jumps as they want, best 2 count. So they can take 2, or they can take as many as they can squeeze in, 7, 8. Whereas this Olympic format is 3 jumps and the best 2 count. They've got to be spun in different directions. And the athletes prefer jam formats for obvious reasons. You get into the session, we'd call it a session, and you get to build up to your best tricks, and you get to feel, okay, what order can I do it in? What feels right in the jam session? If you only have 3 jumps, then you're far more tactical. You will think, okay, for skiers, they have a natural way and an unnatural way to spin. So do you do your more difficult direction first, get that out of the way, hopefully you land it, you don't land it, you've got another chance, and then you do your favorite way to spin next, or do you go the other way around? Different people will approach that in different ways. They're tiny, tiny differences. So Kirsty and Tabanelli's trick was the same, but if anything, Kirsty went super deep in the landing. So she landed a tiny bit heavy. It's tiny. It's like
I was going to say,
cat's
I didn't
whiskers
notice.
difference.
No.
Cat's whiskers difference, which is why she was going to step up and put a more difficult grab on it, because she would have then jumped over into the medals again if she'd landed it. So it's tiny differences. And the structured formats are kind of almost a workaround for park and pipe. They're needed, of course they are, because you need some sort of way to run an event and put on a show and fit into timescales. But if we were having our own sessions, it'd probably tend more towards jam sessions.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned there a couple of times when X Games. It seems to me anyway, and I remarked this to Sean Ingle, that the Winter Olympics have done a far better job of incorporating X Games events into the games. Like in the Summer Olympics, you've seen it with skateboarding. I mean, they tried breakdancing. I don't think you can call that a success in any way. But in the Winter Olympics, it seems like it's really been a very complementary partnership, marriage, integration, whatever the word is. I'm just curious though, like I watched the other night, I think it was men's big air, and they would say that the Japanese athlete 2 weeks ago won the X Games. So they've come straight out of X Games to the Olympic Games. In the minds of the athlete, how do these events compare? Like when you're the X Games champion, does that carry more prestige than being the Olympic gold medalist?
Traditionally, the X Games has really been accepted as the pinnacle of snowboarding, especially big air slopestyle and half pipe. And say it's hard, and this is a bit controversial. It's maybe getting to the stage where both are seen on equal standing, but for different reasons. Different reasons. X Games has changed a lot in the last few years, but it's now Scotty James. Or if you've not watched the documentary on Scotty James on TNT, I highly recommend going to watch it. It's amazing. There are athlete stakeholders who own X Games as a franchise these days. Scotty James is one of them. Jamie Anderson is a founding owner. So it's almost becoming like a rider run event series. There's also Snow League that Sean White has spearheaded, and that's developing as well. And these kinds of I guess organic or action sports events that are running from the perspective of action sports are trying to promote different formats that support excellence in the action sports. The Olympics is a bit of an outlier. People work with Olympics because it's got such a huge reach. We love our sports so much, we want to share them with the world. And that's really exciting for action sports people. It's the chance to put on a show. They love to put on a show. There's huge opportunities to be involved in Olympics high performance sports systems. There's lots of support. There's national teams. There's collaborations going on that are exciting. But there are definitely things within the Olympic focused high performance sports systems that great with action sports ways of working. And so could always do a better job. So I think in answer to your question, both are important now for action sports in the snow sports world.
That
In terms of your...
sorry, go on, Gareth. Yep.
No, you continue.
No, go for it.
I was just going to ask about how your role has changed, because obviously you then went into the management sort of thing. Was it management? You were like sort of team manager for Great Britain?
Yeah, I went from athlete to coach, and then I was the team manager at Roxy. So I became a team manager coach at Roxy. That was when I was doing my master's in performance coaching. So Roxy would be like a professional snow sport team, athletes from lots of different countries. It's the female half of the Quicksilver brand. And we would go to the independent events, so the non-Olympic focused events like X Games, Ticket to Ride World Tour, World Championships. I would take the the riders to those events. And then when snowboard and freeski slopestyle got accepted into the Olympics for the Sochi cycle, I became the program manager, so the team manager for GB Park and Pipe, and I helped set up the whole GB Park and Pipe program with the head coach of snowboarding, Hamish McKnight, and the head coach of freeski at the time, Pat Sharples, who's now the head coach of the whole GB snow sport program. So I then, my job became more about how do we work within Olympic focused sports systems? How do we work with UK sport? How do we collaborate in a culturally authentic way to support these athletes who are used to X Games and independent type scenarios? How do we get them to congeal as a team, come together, work together, support one another underneath the banner of Team GB ultimately at the Olympics? And so that led to Jenny Jones, who's now doing a brilliant job of commentating for the BBC, winning a bronze medal in the Sochi women's slopestyle snowboarding, and then in Pyeongchang, Billy Morgan and Izzy Atkins winning bronze medals. And then I started to move towards researching and coach development. So that was, my journey. And so since 2022, I've left team manager duties and been a researcher at Leeds-Beckett.
So how do the athletes, because they're very independent and culturally very independent, how do they react to being in a team environment then?
Good question. So that was my big challenge when I took the team manager job of a national team. National teams were not well liked back in the day. They tended to come in, somebody from Alpine ski racing would have come in and said, okay, you need a team uniform and you need to do it this way. And this is, if you don't do these things, whatever these things were, you can't get any funding and you won't be part of the snowboard program. And inevitably, snowboarders were like, well, no, I don't want to do that. I want to hang out with my friends from other nations, and we want to push our limits and we want to train and do our thing. So actually, on the ground, that can work together. It's not that the snowboarders don't want to go snowboarding and don't want to put in the work. So I really used team building and what do you do to make it culturally relevant and authentic, to make people want to come and join a national team, and it worked.
Let's talk about your research, because you mentioned that in amongst all of these roles and responsibilities, you began to study, and you're actually, as people would have heard, you're almost, I'd say 95%, maybe 99% of the way towards getting that PhD. Most people, when they start on research, they've got some idea of what they're interested in, but oftentimes they sort of fall into a specific area of research. With you would have deliberately chosen to answer a very specific question, and I'm curious about how that came about. So in the end, you come up with this risk aesthetic framework, which tries to understand and explain how athletes relate to the risks and the aesthetic aspects of the sport. But maybe you can just take us back to your thinking and how that research topic arose out of your own experiences.
So it arose from a couple of different areas. So there's obviously a strand there that goes right back to when I went from alpine ski racing into snowboarding, and then from athlete to coach, team manager, about tensions and how are they experienced by athletes and coaches. So tensions between high performance sport systems and on the ground doing the thing, and the excellence, where that fits in. What is excellence in high performance sport? What's the value and relevance of excellence in high performance sport? And how does tension arise between systems, organizations, and the people doing the sports? So I wanted to understand more about that from an action sports perspective, it being, that scenario had played out across 30 years through all the different Olympic cycles I'd had. So take a deep dive, get to know more. And then at the same time, I'd started to work as a coach developer and with lots of other sports. So that's really my day job. Brilliant job. Love working with all the different sports, supporting coaches to support athletes, and learn, question, reflect on what they're doing. And I started to really notice that within, I've called them traditional sports in the research, and I've got a bit of pushback on that word traditional. I don't mean that in a derogatory way at all. conventional. I could have used the word conventional, or long-standing Olympic sports. There's no judgment attached to the word traditional. I started to notice that a lot of people within the conventional traditional Olympic sport world had regrets or voiced regrets about the investment they'd put into the sport, and was it worth it? We're asking that question, and that collided a lot with the White Review in gymnastics. The other media, sports media, covered lots of controversies, cultural breakdown, the idea of toxic culture in high performance sport, UK sports drive to do medals and more. What does that mean? Where does that come from? What's going on there? And how does that contrast with the narratives that come out from my action sports peers, many who are as long-standing in action sports as I am, and we're still there. We're not gone and got a real job. We're like, we love it. We don't regret a minute of it. It's amazing. It's worth it. Worth every slam, broken bone, injury, and there's lots. If you're involved in action sports, what's the difference? What's going on there? How to understand that, and culturally, how to understand that. So those were the questions that I started with. I didn't aim for a new logic of sport. That emerged very much from the research. I knew that to get to somewhere new, I would have to engage with the philosophy of sport work, but I wanted to do it in an applied way. So I just, I guess I took an action sports perspective. I went divergent and said, okay, what's possible here? Let's see where this goes. Let's throw everything in the air and really look and see what comes up, and then see where things land. That was the approach I took.
That regret, frustration you mentioned, maybe you can just expand on that. Is that you're saying there that people who did, let's call them the traditional sports, in the understanding that listeners will know what we mean now, those people say they had regrets about it because they'd fallen out of love with the sport. They didn't feel that the investment they'd made over 20 years was worth it in their 40s, 50s, post-retirement. What was maybe a bit more on that?
So one example would be, and this is a media example, I do have examples from my research participants as well, but one example was, I think it's Holly Bradshaw, the pole vaulter. And in an article in the mainstream media, I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember the quote off the top of my head, but she said something like, I'm not sure that the time I've invested to become a high performance sport athlete it is worth it, even although I have an Olympic medal. And to me, that was just mind blowing. I thought, wow, okay, what's going on here? Is that just an isolated case, or are there other cases like that? And the more I looked, the more I found other cases, and I became really interested through the research. The experiences of athletes in high performance sports systems can be quite troubling. And if you have read the White Review, this won't be new. Not in all cases, and I think there's a lot of really good work going on in the cultural change space in high performance sport. Even in the last 3 or 4 years, I think things have changed significantly. But to talk to somebody who has an Olympic medal, one quote from an Olympic medal winner in a conventional traditional sport was, I won the Olympic medal from London, and the minute I won it, the next second I won it, I knew I was quitting. I was over it. I was done.
Sorry, I was going to say, is it a sweeping generalization to say that it's these traditional sports, the athletes often see them as a job or as a way to make money, whereas in, say, snowboarding, these cultural sports, that it's a hobby and it's a lifestyle? Is that too sweeping a generalization, do you think?
I think that's the generalization that's often made, and certainly the generalization that I see in the media. But I wanted more than that in the research. It's definitely not as simple as that. I've also have a lot of research participants from traditional sports who have had as long career as I've had and are still as passionate about their sports, and their sports are their hobbies. They are they love every minute of going to do the sports that they came from still, even if their professional life has taken them in a different direction. So that I think it's 100% possible to love a sport your whole life. It's just interesting the kind of stories that were coming out from the recently retired, especially high performance athletes, and what that might mean for how we understand the value of the excellence bit in high performance sport. And I think that's something that's often missing. And what makes sport worth it for high performance people? What is that? And I think it can be quite a few different things, but I don't think we really understand it as well as we could.
Well,
Do
we
you
may
think that
understand
as
it better now thanks to
snowboarding,
your work, but
Mhm.
Well, maybe I've got lots of questions, at least, lots
yeah.
of different angles to
Mm,
approach
mm,
that idea of meaningfulness, value, and relevance. And does it extend out into other areas apart from sport? What's the purpose? That's a bigger question, even still. And I think that's an important question, especially in terms of Olympics. It has such a huge reach. I think I read a statistic from the Paris Olympics that 84% of the world's population who were able to watch on a screen or TV, whatever, a TV or watch things on on a recording watched the Paris Olympics at some point.
mm,
That's 84% of the world's population thought sport was interesting enough to take a look.
mm,
That's amazing. So the power of sport is huge. The interest of sport is clearly worth it. It's clearly valuable. The amount that's invested into it, enormous in all the different ways that looks like. What's the value and relevance? What's the purpose? Do we understand that? Why do we like excellence in sport? What is it that draws us to that?
do you think there's a
They're really
risk?
philosophical questions, though.
Mm,
Sorry.
no, I was gonna say, do you think there's a risk with sports like use snowboarding or skateboarding as an example? As they become more corporate, do they risk losing their own identity, which put them there in the first place? Are the athletes
There's a lot.
changing?
I think that people are always changing. Like, that's part of life, part of culture, and I don't think we should get too caught up in that. It's are we changing for the better, and what does better look like? Um, so the idea of incorporation and subcultures has been used a lot in the research into action sports. So that's a real field that's live and really interesting. But again, I wanted to step away a little bit from that lens and get to the experiences and the excellences themselves. So that's in there and it's important, but
mm.
it's not the main angle, I
Yeah,
think.
because when I was doing a little bit of reading about this, I was reading about Chloe Kim, the
Yeah,
snowboarder. She's got two golds and now a silver at this games. But in 2018, she was like, she was done with snowboarding. She felt like she was done with snowboarding for a bit because of the pressure. I think she threw her medal away into the bin. She did retrieve it afterwards. But it's interesting that obviously these athletes, they're moving from a very inclusive community sort of sport where they are basically essentially playing with their friends, aren't they? And then they get thrust into this massive cultural machine or corporate machine. And it must be almost disorientating for them and for their mental health as well. It must be quite difficult for them to navigate.
absolutely. I think if you don't have your action sports community around you, you can get very isolated. So that's definitely part of that tension in action sports. I'm
Mm,
not sure how it plays out in traditional sports in comparison, that idea of incorporation, but I do think that, I mean, we're living in such a globalized world now in terms of corporations. I think it's there for sure. And you're always in danger of, and this is me speaking as an ex-athlete, selling out, that idea of selling out. So
mm.
if you're selling out your special thing, your excellence, all the work you put in, and I do, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong here or contribute. Um, People don't put in that many hours of really hard, difficult training because they're just going to get a paycheck That's not generally how it works. There's something more in it. The hard work is going towards achieving something that is valuable for some reason, can be different reasons for different people. But the idea that it's instrumental in that sense, um, only instrumental in that sense, or externally motivated, I don't think that rings true.
Well, because I was reading on your website, that Risk Aesthetic website, you were saying, and Stoke. Now, this is, I didn't want to bring up Stoke. Do people still use the term Stoke? I thought that was, yeah.
Absolutely. Mia
Absolutely.
Brooks used it the other day on the BBC when she
There
got
we go.
interviewed.
Uh,
It took me a while to make that into a concept because
yeah.
I was like, okay, this is just terminology, like, yeah, stoked bro. But actually it's a thing. Stoked is a real thing. And if you talk to any action sports person, climbers maybe would say psyched more than stoked. They have a version, but they will understand intimately what you mean if you say, oh, I'm
Hmm.
so stoked.
Okay, so
So
let's
yeah,
let's
it's a
It's
thing.
let's
also a
help everyone
concept, yeah.
else understand what Stoke means then in the context of how you discovered its value to these athletes.
Yeah. So stoked is an experience and a feeling. So it's the experience of feeling like you've accomplished or achieved something
Hmm.
that is the best possible achievement under the circumstances. Often it's with other people, so it's culturally valuable or socially shared as well. But it's something that is well done, taking into account what's going on. So there's an element of creativity often in stoked, but it can just be you've had an amazing day when the conditions are rubbish. That can make you really stoked because you're so attuned to what's possible in the environment and compared to your condition when you're doing action sports. When you achieve, even if it's a tiny little achievement, that you feel that, you appreciate that. So there's an element also of humility in there. I've called that positive insignificance because it's a kind of humility that opens up perspectives of what's possible.
Hmm.
For example, if you've ever tried to learn to skateboard, very, very difficult. If you try to learn that a basic move on a skateboard is an ollie when you can basically jump the skateboard. It's hard and you're going to fall off a lot of times, even though it's considered an easy move in skateboarding. When you accomplish your first ollie, you are stoked because it's difficult and there's a lot of complexity involved. There's a lot of jeopardy involved. So stoked encaptures all of those things together.
Hmm.
It builds empathy with others, connection. So yeah, it's a powerful thing. The stoke.
Does Stoke
You said,
cross cultural divides? Like we watch the Olympics. We see this young Korean athlete that you mentioned, who I guess must be still 17 or something years old. Would she
Yeah.
describe Stoke in the same way as a 35-year-old veteran of 3 Olympic Games does, as a result of the same set of inputs, external context, etc.? Like, is it universal?
And that is definitely an area that I think needs more research. From the I talked to 3 Japanese people in the research, 2 of them via Google Translate. And so it's sometimes hard culturally
Mm.
with language. However, a lot of action sports is unsaid. So if you watch the body language at the bottom of the big air, the pipe, the slope style, you will see how stoked the athletes are for one another. They're always hugging and high-fiving and cheering each other on. So I would say I would guess it most definitely does cross over culturally.
Mm.
And certainly from the stilted conversations through Google Translate and the research, um, it would point in that direction.
because you said participants consistently rate Stoke higher than winning. Is that the case, really?
So what that means is, um, so Mia Brooks's quote the other day, keep going back to Mia. She's after she did the big air and she ended up fourth, and she tried the new trick, the 1620. She said something along the lines of, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, I'd rather have tried the 16 and come fourth than have cleaned up the 14 and still come fourth. So she was happier to do the new thing and be stoked than she would have, she was concerned
Play it
about
safe.
the bronze medal, certainly. So tactically, she probably could have swung for bronze with a cleaned up 14. And that might have been the optimization lens that you would have put on if you were playing for the medals. But
Mm.
she's not playing for the medals only. She in her case, she was like, well, I can play for if I'm playing for medals, I'll play for the gold medal, but I'm also playing for the Stoke.
Mm.
But
So
that's the
there,
difference, yeah, with traditional sports. We keep calling them traditional sports, I know, but my mentality would be I want the medal because, like, you play it safe. But obviously, it's just a different mindset, and that's what you've been looking into. Um, 'Cause I was reading about Su Yiming,
yep,
snowboarder. He did an interesting interview. He said the 2022 version of me was a dreamer who just caught lightning in a bottle, all raw passion and the explosive joy of breaking through. The 2026 me is still that dreamer, but now with a much clearer roadmap. Life has shifted from a singular, all-consuming focus on snowboarding to mastering the balance between the demands of the level, media, partnerships, expectations. So he's actually seen himself evolve, but evolve in a way almost away from Stoke, where he is having to understand that there's more going on in the world, and that would be, and I mentioned it a couple of times. It's a difficult path for these like youngsters to navigate, um, away almost away from what they really love about the sport, and I'd be afraid that they're going to lose perhaps that joy of doing
yeah.
it over time.
I think you can look at that in a slightly different way as well. It's also a really pragmatic approach. So to take that on and go, okay, well, as a person, I need to grow to be able to work with all of that stuff I have to do without losing the dreamer. I need to complement it to get what I want to do done. There's an opportunity here. So I'm going to stretch myself and I'm going to learn how to do those bits well. And I think that's a real action sports thing. You see the opportunities, you optimize those opportunities without losing the stoke. So you're working in both. You've got a foot in
Mm.
both camps.
Mm.
And there's a term for that in the research. It's called flexible opposition. So you're trying to you don't look a gift horse in the mouth. And that's definitely what snowboarding did when it first went into the Olympics. There were it split the camp 50-50. Should snowboarding even be an Olympic sport?
Mm.
Very controversial at the time in the late 90s.
Oh.
But there was a slight majority that went, let's not look a gift horse in the mouth here. They've got lots of resources. Let's use that so we can go snowboarding more.
Mm.
That kind of mentality. And if you look at sports marketing world, the number of people who are brand managers or creative directors who have action sports backgrounds is massive. Sports marketing world being really influenced by action sports.
Mm.
So that creative,
Yeah.
pragmatic side.
The didn't we discover around Paris at the Olympics and even before that climbing has had some of that cultural pushback against its inclusion, right, Gareth? We heard from some people in climbing saying that actually they don't really want climbing in the Olympics because it runs counter to the culture that makes them love the sport. So it sounds to me as though climbing's introduction to the Olympics met with some of the same issues that snowboarding's did to the Winter Games.
Yeah, definitely climbing, skateboarding was the same.
Mm.
Zoom back before skateboarding was the Olympics. There was talk of the IOC awarding skateboarding to cycling in terms of a governing body, which obviously was hugely controversial.
Mm.
That didn't happen,
Mm.
fortunately, and skateboarding is governing itself. But I think there are definitely camps within each of these action sports that fully believe they don't fit in the Olympic structure.
Yeah. So
Going back to
inside
your
the
research
sorry,
just
just
briefly.
to ask you this then, inside the mind of an Olympian, Winter Olympian, the medal is it secondary to Stoke?
So inside the mind of any athlete, if you're entering a competition, and you have a chance to be the best in the competition, you're gonna take your chance. Of course, you're gonna try and do your best, and you're gonna try and take on your peers because that's the point of the competition. So that doesn't go away. However, um, if it was the case that you won the medal by default, the conditions were bad, half the field fell over, you were the only one that stood up, but you rode at 50%. You didn't do anywhere near your best, and you thought that wasn't even a nice looking trick, you would be super bummed. You would not be happy.
Yeah.
So it's nuanced.
Yeah, sure.
Of course, these athletes are trying to win the medal, but it's not just the medal.
The reason I ask is because I wondered, if I go back to this, and correct me if I get it wrong, Stoke is when you mentioned something about you have a sense of achievement. That's achievement independent of the context of the competition. It's I did the best I could do. You mentioned, for instance, in the snowboard, I came fourth, but I'm stoked because I tried something for myself. In your interviews with those 74 athletes and your research, are athletes more likely to be stoked away from the competition lens, all by themselves, when it's just them and their own achievement, or are they more likely to be stoked in front of the whole world as a performance?
They're more likely to be stoked when they are in what I mentioned before called a session.
Yeah.
So when they're bouncing off of one another and everybody raises the level. So that idea of shared stoke becomes what Todd Richards, who's also an ex-Olympian and now commentator for NBC, coined the Stoke train.
Yeah.
So when everybody gets on that wave of, okay, now is the time, we're going to do it, we're going to do the new thing, then that's where life-defining moments are created. Actually, a Japanese Olympian who I interviewed, when I asked the question, what's the difference between your traditional sports peers? She had a lot of friends who competed in Summer Olympics, and your action sports peers. And she said the difference is that everyone from action sports has a life-defining moment, even if they don't have a medal. And they walk away feeling like, they're complete as a person. That was the language she used. Whereas in my traditional sport peer group, if they don't have a medal, they feel something's missing. So there's something interesting there about the cultural view of success and excellence in these sports and how it defines you in the context of your athletic personhood.
One of the threads that runs through your website is the term risk. Are you referring to risk in terms of risk of failure or risk of injury? I mean, it's called Risk Aesthetic, the website. What do you term by risk?
So the risk comes from the hazard in the environment or interacting with the environment that creates the risk. Action sports are environmentally constituted, so you do tricks off of things, whether it's a skateboard and your environment is man-made usually, or in snowboarding you could say the same. The jumps are built out of snow. If it's in the backcountry or free riding or big wave surfing, then the features in the environment are natural. But if you interact with those features, then the risk appears because there's mechanisms for injury. So the risk is very real, but it's part of the performance.
Part of the appeal as well.
Part of the appeal, for sure. It's a real relational element, and it's generative. So you are choosing how to engage with the feature, which is slightly different in the timed versions where there is risk involved in going the fastest down the course. There is a difference. The difference is mitigated by the aesthetic. So the goal of engaging is to do something cool, stylish, beautiful, well executed, however you want to describe that. So risk and aesthetic are working very much together in the decision-making process and are baked into the performance.
Yeah, so as in, I can push the risk this far, but then at some point it starts not being aesthetic anymore because I'm not going to land it. Now it's not going to go on TikTok so well as it would have done had I landed it. So I'll do 14, not a 16, because that's going to be that's what you mean there, right?
But then you don't get the Stoke.
No, but you
Yeah.
still you
So
must,
the
right?
both
Because
are
yeah, you would.
both are correct. So both are correct because there's an internal and an external element to the performance. And this is the really interesting thing where the research took me to. I didn't expect to get there, but this is where it went, into really trying to understand how do you learn skill? What is perception? What is experience? How do they work together? If it's relational to the environment, what does that mean for how we think about learning and performance? And it became clear throughout the rounds of research that the action sports athletes hold an inside kinesthetic view of their performance and an external view at the same time. So that wasn't so surprising to me, having done lots of visualization training over the years. What was surprising was that people viewing judges have an outside perspective and a felt sense of. They are mind surfing what they are seeing as part of their understanding. So the inside out connection is going on all the time in action sports. Does that work in others in traditional sports? That is to be discovered. Perhaps it does, but in action sports, I think that is
So
going on most of the
sorry, just
time.
to go back then. So the athlete has you called it an inner kinesthetic appreciation or awareness. What was the wording?
Yeah, so I think it's a perceptual thing, but
Uh,
it is an awareness and an appreciation at the same time. Experience of Stoke is connected to that,
so that means to
but they
just to
have
define that for me. So just define that. So I'm learning a skill. I'm doing a skill in on the half pipe, and I'm saying this feels right, and that's because I'm just aware of my own body. So I'm feeling it from inside. The external is I'm able to almost take myself out of body and imagine what I look like to someone else. Is that what it is?
exactly to someone else. Yeah, and where I really honed in on that is I ended up interviewing a few of the filmers and photographers who have been filming action sports for many years. And I was more interested in the storytelling part. However, they're they were both very good, one skateboarder, one snowboarder, at doing the sports as well. And it was their explanations that cued me into that. So they said something like, any of the best riders, snowboarders that we are working with will know what they look like as well as what it feels like.
Mm.
Um, and so I started to ask the athletes if that was the case, and it is definitely the case.
So let's say picking any sport here, tennis, and I'm learning to serve. Actually, forget about learning because I think we're talking about people who've already achieved a degree of mastery. I'm Yannick Sinner,
Yeah,
whatever, and I've worked out that I've got to improve my serve to match Alcaraz. Does Sinner have that same appreciation of his body and space? Is he able to look at himself from outside and be aware from inside?
I'd love to ask them.
Mm,
I imagine it's completely possible. Does it matter? Would be maybe a better question.
mm,
Obviously, in a judged and aesthetic action sport, it's baked into the culture that it matters. So
yeah,
there's a
yeah,
social element to it mattering. In tennis, is style important? That's a
right,
good question.
yeah.
What part does it play?
Okay,
I
so
got
it's
to
when
ask,
you
did you
look
ever
at them, you know,
regret?
sorry, so when you look at them from outside, I just want to explore this a bit more. When you look at them from outside, it's not just a function of like, are there joints in the right places at the right times in order to execute the skill? It's also it must look good.
It must look good, and it must, and this is going to sound too abstract, it must be authentic.
Okay.
So what does that mean? When I was interviewing people from action sports, they would, a common thing, again, I'm going to paraphrase a bit, would be, oh, I can really tell what that person's like from the way they snowboard, from the way they do their tricks. And I'm like, what do you mean? Tell me more. And that can go really deep into to expression. There's an expression and an interpretation involved that becomes way more than just technical execution.
Yeah, I was going to ask, when you started the research, have you ever regretted that it's very conceptual? So it must be very difficult to actually research something which isn't tangible. There are no results. You can't, there's no statistics, that sort of thing. Have you found that difficult to get your ideas across? Because obviously, not that we're struggling with them, but these are like sort of nebulous ideas, rather than firm facts.
Yeah. So I'm kind of glad that they are, because I think this is the part that's missing in high performance sport. We know so much about the empirical sport science side of sport. It's all brilliant, and I have invested in a lot of it over the years as an athlete, as a coach, as a team manager. I think it supports people to do really good jobs at what they're doing. But the extra bit that helps people bring out the magic, the style, the thing that sets them apart from other people is how does it all come together? How does it work? I think that's the bit that's interesting and that we don't know so much about, and it is hard to articulate. We perhaps just don't have the best tools or perspectives currently, or just haven't used there's some old rusty tools in the toolbox that we need to get back out. So I've tried to engage in that process. It's just a first step though. Mm-hmm. So how to apply these ideas will be the next step. What does that mean in the real world for the application? At the moment, I've tried to understand, explore what might be going on.
Particularly across sports into the traditional sports, right? Have you thought much about that? Like, if we role played and I'm a coach and I'm saying to you, listen, I've read this and I understand that in your sports you want the Stoke and it's what motivates people, it what gives them validation even beyond a career. I work with cyclists. Is there anything I can apply to this group of aspirant young elite cyclists that will allow them to leverage some of winter sports magic into cycling?
I'm sure there is. Certainly, I think it's worth a try. So that idea of expression and interpretation can be used as a peer-to-peer learning approach, if you like, a task. If you are cueing into what somebody else is doing, and just on a simplistic level, it helps you understand what you're doing and why you might be doing it, how you might do it differently. So even an appreciation of somebody else's performance in comparison with your own, and elements of the felt sense of that performance in conjunction with the empirical numbers of that performance will support development of the performance and the person. So it's a holistic way of developing performance and person together that can be individualized. It's going to be different for each person. So in that sense, it can also be transformative and for the person supporting that learning as well. So these are not new ideas. A lot of those ideas are already out there in transformative learning approaches to coaching, for example. I'm just adding nuance to the experiential and perceptual bits that perhaps we've put over there, we put on the side, and we could, bring back in again. So the first thing I would try is peer-to-peer, support peer-to-peer learning. What happens when you do that? We're very individualized, I think, in the way we think about developing performance, for good reason. Each person's their own individual, unique case. But we're also socially connected. How does that work? How can we get to our own blind spots by understanding what others are doing versus ourselves? What does that mean? Then what will happen culturally? So that would spearhead more into cultural approaches.
Especially in team environments.
Give it a try.
As you're talking, like, if I'm coaching a rugby team where the sum, what's the saying? The sum needs to be greater than the parts, or this, whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And peer to peer, like if you, because I've heard a lot of rugby coaches say the most difficult thing is trying to teach cohesion in the team, so that when one person makes a decision, everyone else understands what that decision's about to be, that sort of thing. So I wonder if the team sports environments would be more likely to find ways to apply this than individual sports that aren't necessarily risk aesthetic.
I think rugby is super interesting because you have an ethos, don't you, in rugby?
Mm.
There, you would say things like that was, or you can correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm not a real rugby person. That was a beautiful play, or you would appreciate the style of playing. So I think there are elements of risk and aesthetics baked in to a sport like rugby, and there is a cultural ethos as well. So there are huge similarities that I'd love to unpack further.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, that's maybe, for the future.
The French backline at the weekend. Sorry, Gareth, but
No, that's
sometimes,
fine. I was just not brilliant. I was just thinking that. I was
yeah.
thinking there is Stoke in rugby because
Mm.
sometimes they don't take the most practical solution to scoring a try. They take the most beautiful, and
Like when
so yeah,
when Finn
you can
Russell
apply it anywhere.
when Finn Russell bumped the ball on for the Scotland try at the weekend, the first
Mm,
score. Like, I mean, that's a Stoke moment, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
completely. The whole
Yeah.
country was stoked.
For 80 minutes and beyond. Yeah, so it's interesting. So you mentioned earlier, like, that you've got lots of questions. You've answered some of them. You've got lots of questions. Like, what do you reckon would be in your next phase of trying to understand this better? Like, what are the important things you'd be asking?
Oh gosh. You maybe asked me that after the 7th of May. After I've done and dusted. No, I think it's really how do you bring both the risk and the aesthetic into conversations about policy and cultural change. So what do you do at governance level or organization level to support the likelihood of risk aesthetic blends um, flourishing, working together to support excellence? Because really if you're in high performance sport, you're interested in the excellent performance coming out the other end. So how to set things up to get that excellent performance to the benefit of everybody. And I see that also as a kind of broad sustainability. So I do think if you zoom right out, high performance sport is at a bit of a crossroads in its existence. So why would we continue to invest so much money into that? We need to be able to answer that question. If the world's, burning and there's all these crises going on, what's our contribution to that? Do we have an idea of what sustainability for people and planet is, and how we can help in terms of the excellence that we produce? So I think there are really big questions that are worth taking on as well, that need slightly different perspectives than we already have in our circles to be able to engage with.
Mm. Mm. Gareth, any final questions or thoughts from you?
What have we got left in the Olympics of these events? I'm trying to think.
Out of interest, what's your
So-
favorite event at the Olympics? Do you love the half pipe most because it's the one you did, or have you found other things that give you more enjoyment to watch?
Oh gosh, I love watching all sports at Olympics. I've obviously got a soft spot for half pipe, clearly. So yeah, definitely don't miss that. I'm really looking forward to the slopestyle finals, the snowboard
Hmm.
slopestyle finals. Um, the ski half pipe's coming up. I'm definitely looking forward to watching that. Um, I like watching all the Winter Olympic events. I don't think I really have a favorite. So yeah, bring it on. Just don't get much else done when you've got so many great things to watch.
Yeah.
I'm rooting for Mark McMorris in the men's snowboard slopestyle. If I were going to have to put my money on rooting for one person, just because he's had an amazing career and he's done so much for snowboarding. Such an inspirational person.
What's his
Got brilliant
backstory?
personal
Because
stories.
what is that? We
He's
don't.
had he's a top Canadian rider. He's won the most X Games medals ever in snowboarding, but he's chasing that Olympic gold medal. He's got a couple of not gold medals, but he's really been at the top of the game for a long time. He's in his early 30s. He's really stepped up a level again, which is not an easy feat when you've been doing the sport as long as he has. And he's on top form. He actually hurt himself in the big air training and couldn't compete in the big air, but he's been cleared to ride. He's back riding for the slopestyle and he's made it into the finals. So I'm really looking forward to watching that.
You mentioned earlier that I think it was in the context of a Japanese athlete you spoke to who said that her friends in traditional sports feel something's missing because they don't have a medal, but everyone in action sports has their moment, their Stoke moment. My last question is like, do you have a Stoke moment that you can recall? Or are there many?
A Stoke moment. I've got many.
But one that comes to mind.
And the one that comes to mind in a competition context, the Stoke moment is probably I did actually do well in this moment, but that was a byproduct. Was when I did my first ever 720. That was like one of the bigger tricks that I did in the half pipe at the time, and I did it because all my peers from different countries were cheering me on. You know, they were like, "You can do this, you can do this," and it was a new. I'd never landed it before. It was a Grand Prix in Mammoth Mountain, and I'll always remember that. Mostly because everyone's vested in it. So it's like our shared Stoke moment and everybody was cheering and I did the best result I'd ever done and beat people that I'd never beaten before as well. But the 720 was the Stoke moment. So I've got many. These days, Stoke moments can just be with one or two other people on Cairngorm in really nice snow conditions doing a really nice turn. That gives me the same amount of Stoke. So yeah. It keeps regenerating. It's a sustainable commodity.
That is fascinating because, I mean, Gareth and I are both, I'd say we're relatively new cyclists. Gareth more, especially because of your injuries that forced him onto the bike. But you get to a point as a cyclist where there's a moment where you realize that the Strava comms that and the fact you'd finish your ride on Strava and you'd have 55 medals, and then nowadays I finish rides and sometimes I have none. You say, well, you lose, and who cares actually? But the point I'm trying to make is you as recreational athletes, you run out of achievements to tick off unless you find those achievements in the act of doing the thing, as opposed to the timing validation that it provides you when you get a medal or a PB or whatever it is, you know?
It's intrinsic rewards over extrinsic. And we've talked about this before because I'm a very intrinsic reward person. It's the actual doing of the event that I enjoy. That's why I enjoyed fell running so much. It was being up in the mountains that counted, not crossing the line, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Stoke is probably all about. Is actually being in the moment. Perhaps is another way of defining it.
100%. I think like in the moment and flow state are an interesting component and are baked into that Stoke experience. That'd be a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
The importance of flow and clutch state.
That would be perhaps one for another time. For now, though, I mean, what a fascinating insight into a world of performance that, like, it's not lost on me, but I watch at least half the Olympic sports I watch with less appreciation than I would for a timed sport, centimeter, gram, second sports, which are so simple for me to understand and process. And I think it's the same for you, right, Gareth? You said, the subjectively scored sports, they're a little bit alien to us sometimes. But this has been truly enlightening.
If you hold on to anything, hold on to that baked in jeopardy that is part of, so the risk and the blend of aesthetic that brings the risk to life or helps people mitigate it, and that's what they're playing with. It's baked in, and the margins are in the jeopardy and how well somebody handles that or not.
Yeah, I mean, it is.
You said that before you. Sorry, I was going to say you said that before we started. I think before we recorded that they expect to not complete the run 20% of the time. So you've got to accept that before you even start.
Yeah, and that was some stats work that UK Sport did for GB Park and Pipe, albeit it was 10 years or so ago, so it might be slightly different now. But the best, the most consistent athletes had a 1 in 5 chance of not completing. And so that 20% is baked in, and that's for the best athletes. So if you're still a developing athlete, the chances that you're not going to complete your run or your trick are even higher. So that's the odds. It's expected that it might not go to plan, but if the athlete can work with their community, their peers to make it happen, that really is a magical thing. They're going against odds, whereas I think in most other sports that's not so much the case.
Yeah, I mean, I watched the Winter Olympics, and that jeopardy is the appeal. Uh, Even my lack of
Yeah,
appreciation for the skills and their difficulty isn't enough to detract from the fact that you watch it with your breath held, and then they landed, and
yeah.
there's this eruption of sort of achievement that typifies the
Mm.
events. So yeah, thank you so much for your time and for trying to explain that to us. I'm far more enlightened and really have enjoyed the conversation. So thank you.
No, likewise.
Brilliant.
Thanks for having me on. Great to chat.
Yeah, for
Awesome.
sure. We'll
Enjoy.
we'll be getting you back on again. I've no doubt in the future. Yeah. So thanks once again to you. Best of luck for your PhD defense. I'm sure you'll let us know how that goes over on Discourse for the Science of Sport supporters. And yeah, this show comes out with 5 or 6 days left of the Olympic Games. Enjoy it with a new sense of enlightenment, and we will speak to you all again in the next few days. For another, goodbye.